Yeah, I remembered. Welcome to Finance Risk Audit and Standards Committee meeting, Monday 18th of May. This meeting is live streamed and recorded. Item 2, the emergency evacuation procedure. I haven't been told of any fire drills, so if we do get a fire alarm, it's moving out to the lawn on the front as best you can, to be fair. So if we can move on to apologies. Have we got any apologies? Sorry.
I've just got apologies from David Jeffels.
Thank you. Is Alex in? Is Alex Moore in?
No. Oh, hang on. No, he is. He's behind us.
Oh, right. Sorry. I didn't see you there, but okay. No, I had to... Keith got stuck in traffic somewhere, and Keith Wilkinson is going to be late. Alex Moore is sitting in to see how everything goes along in the finance meeting. Welcome. He's sat behind us anyway. Okay. Public minutes of the meeting held on 23rd of February 26. Has everybody read and digested all okay? Thank you. Do we have to go?
Just ask people to approve, show hands to approve.
Can we have a show of hands on that one, please? Thank you. Okay. Item 5. Members are reminded that it's their responsibility to declare the nature of any personal, prejudicial and/or disclosable interests relating to any agenda item immediately prior to its consideration, and are encouraged to complete a written declaration form which is provided. Item 6, exclusion of the public from the meeting during consideration of items 18 and 19 on the grounds that involves likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 1 and 2 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. I shall go through that again.
Just need to get approval for that.
Right. We need approval for that then at this moment in time. Okay, thank you. If we move on to item 7, 25-26, internal audit. We have Tom to give us an update. Thank you.
Good morning, thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. So yes, I'm here to present the annual opinion on the work that we've conducted this year, our internal audit work, and our opinion on the authority's effectiveness for its framework of governance, risk management, and control. The report sets out the work that we've completed this year, as well as the opinions for each of those pieces of work. And our overall opinion, the opinion for this year is reasonable assurance, which is set out on page 14 of your pack. The work, that opinion is based solely on the work we've undertaken this year, and we've placed no reliance on work undertaken by any other assurance providers. The individual audits, their assurance ratings are given at Appendix A on page 15 of the pack. And then at Appendix B, there is the detailed findings and the agreed actions for each of those pieces of work. Moving on from those At Appendix D, we've also got the results of our follow-up work that we've conducted on agreed actions. So for this year, we've followed up a total of 21 actions. 10 of those were completed, 9 are outstanding, and 2 have revised dates. But for those which are outstanding, we are in contact with officers on those, and in some cases have received updates against them, but either waiting further evidence or further information such that we can close them. That Appendix D, apologies, on page 25 of the pack. The report also includes the results of our quality assurance and improvement programme and the results of our annual customer survey, which is at Appendix E, starting on page 26. So each year we conduct quality assurance work in accordance with our professional standards, and we provide the results of this work to the committee so that you can gain reassurance that we're conducting our work in accordance with those professional standards. Some things to note in that, I appreciate it's quite a long section of the report. The annual customer survey, the results are quite positive. Most respondents gave good or excellent feedback, but the response rate was quite low. Unfortunately, it tends to be quite low, but where we do get responses, they do tend to be quite positive. I think the main thing to note at the end of that appendix is that we haven't identified through our work any areas where we think we're not conforming with professional standards for the year. So that's the report in a nutshell. Happy to take any questions on any of the results and findings of the work this year. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I mean, it all looks very positive. But one area which everyone with the business is concerned about, which we've alluded to, is cyber attacks. You know, it happens at the companies with extensive spend a lot more, like Marks and Spencer's, for instance, Jaguar. So we're all at risk from it, and it's not when it's a recovery, as you suggested. And here we're saying that, you know, obviously we're putting together, and with the best will in the world, there's no guarantees even when it happens exactly what what you can do, because it depends on all the time. These people are trying to find new ways of getting into your software and whatever. But I can see on here that the timescale was we were waiting for the timescale for completion is the 31st of March, but we have followed up with Office of Waiting Response, and it looks like it's going to be September. I mean, there's obviously, you know, our office can do so much, but are there companies or people who obviously give advice on this, and are you the ones that would sort of point us in that direction, or is it something that we do on our own? Because obviously you deal with lots of people and councils or whatever, and be interested to know if you sort of point us in the right direction on that one. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, so in terms of the follow-ups, yes, we followed up with officers on the 2nd of June and the 31st of March. I think at the time of writing this report, we were still waiting for responses on those. So I think to just go back and double check that we've had that information and we're able to mark them off as completed. We obviously, when we're agreeing actions, we work with officers to set realistic and achievable timescales. We don't want to give timescales which are unrealistic and unachievable. Obviously, with the authorities' resources as well, we've got to keep that in mind. In terms of advice, the authority has a contract with a third-party provider who also provides support to them. So just bear with me, I'll just get the report up itself. I can just remind myself what the provider's called. So it's with, can you remember who the provider is? For backups.
No, I got next to backups, but fine, wouldn't it?
So it's just popped out of my head. But you do have third-party support from another organisation to help you with these arrangements. So they would be the first point of call for an IT team. Yeah, exactly.
All I'm asking, do you think the road? Sorry. Okay, so it's an annual thing, but you know, it's all the time. But I just wanted, I said, this is critical to any business, whatever business it is, and it's important that it is really sorted out as quickly as possible, you know, and I would suggest, you know, that what's sort of following up all the time. Thank you.
Just so that what I'd probably reiterate is that I think cyber is probably one of the biggest risks we face. It's in our risk register and it has quite a lot of focus in there. And certainly we do a lot of work on fraud through both internal and external auditors. I think in this it's kind of highlighted a couple of areas we can improve, but I don't think there's anything sort of that's giving us any critical exposure from a fraud perspective or a cyber perspective at the moment. And I think actually we've de-risked quite a lot by going out to the cloud for some of our more exposed systems, like our finance system. There's just a couple of areas to tighten up on. I think one of the areas that comes out in here quite a lot is actually around record keeping and documentation as well, where we need to do more of that, including kind of follow-ups and things of that sort. I think there's more of that work to do as well. So it does highlight some really useful things, but I think from a fraud and cyber perspective, I think we actually work really, really tightly as a team on that. It's one of the things that's probably my primary focus is Section 151 from a fraud risk perspective. And we often get good external reports as well. So there are a couple of things in here for us to tighten up on. I know Simon's been working on those with the provider, who neither of us can remember the name of, but with the provider.
Signal Telecom.
Signal Telecom.
That's just spotted it, sorry.
And then quite a lot of that has been tightened up and delivered. But I think generally speaking, these recommendations are things just to make us a little bit better rather than any kind of major exposure risk.
That's great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. To follow up on Heather's concern about cyber, just two quick suggestions from my end. I mean, one of the things that I've seen in other organizations is that, for example, the password of the users is required to be changed every 3 months or so. So, for example, at North Yorkshire, we do that. I don't believe that that's the case here because it didn't prompt me to change my password for a long time. On the other hand, you have an additional feature, which is when someone logs in from a new device, then you require exactly two-factor authentication, which is, I think, a positive thing that's not always everywhere. So that's one suggestion. Another one is I'm aware of sometimes some organizations, what they do is they have training where the senior management meet and play a scenario that, for example, a crime organization managed to get hold of the system and steal some data and then ask for a ransom to be played, how the board, how the organization would react in this situation. So it's like a session for the management to be prepared on how to act, what the protocol is in such a situation.
Yeah, they're all really good points. I think our policy is to require changes every 6 months, George, but on passwords. But if that's not happened, let us know, because you're right, that's something that should be in place. Certainly, I had to change mine back in December, so I'm probably due a change before too long. The last point's a really important one, and I think one of the we were cognizant when Tom and his team were doing the work around our disaster recovery and business continuity plans that they hadn't been reviewed for some time and probably hadn't been properly exercised. And so we are planning a tabletop exercise later on this year. The scenario, of course, we won't know that until we actually get to the tabletop itself, because that's part of the point of doing it. But like you said, I've been through those exercises before in other organisations, and they're very helpful. In terms of helping you to diagnose the areas where you need to put in place systems and mechanisms to ensure that you can recover efficiently and speedily from any kind of disaster, whether it's cyber or something more physical.
Thank you for this, and I think, yes, I can confirm that the password has not been required me to change it for certainly more than 6 months. So it could be just affecting members only.
Thank you, George. Are we another? Go, Malcolm, then John.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, first of all, overall it's a very good report, isn't it? So well done to the staff, Pete and everybody. I was interested in what people were saying, because my reflection of it is that there are obviously a number of things that we can improve on, but nothing of them is drastic. And I just wondered if there's any of those that you're particularly concerned about, Pete. or whether it really is just improving little bits here and there.
There's none that I'm really concerned about in terms of thinking that they hugely undermine our controls, but there are certainly some where I think we can strengthen. We've talked about one just now, actually, the tabletop exercise, which we've not done for a number of years. But actually some of the ones in here, and it's part of why we choose some of the internal audit areas that we know we're a little bit weaker on, because it really helps us actually pinpoint some of those recommendations. So for example, creditors in here, we knew the new system had some weaknesses around purchase order and goods receipting already. This has really helped to highlight how we might address some of those. So I think that would be one of them. I don't think it undermines anything especially, but it's one that if we're going to get all the efficiency of the system that we want, then we have to get that purchase order goods receipting process right. That's what will help with resourcing. It's what will get the real benefits from the resource point of view out of the system. So it certainly highlights some of those. I think business continuity, it highlights a couple of the documentation points, but that tabletop exercise absolutely is one that we ought to be doing. And then I think aside from that, most things are okay. I think PCI DSS, it's always good to undertake that. We haven't for a number of years. It just helps to, again, make sure we're doing the right things by card security, etc., with some good recommendations. So no, I think what I'd say is I think it gives us a good position, but there's always things we can improve on. It merits why we pick areas of potential weakness in some of these to get some really good recommendations. And just thanks to Tom and the team actually for a really constructive internal audit this year.
Go on, John.
Thanks, Chair. And it is in relation to that, the business continuity recovery plan. And we know from the documents that it hadn't been updated since 2017. And I just wondered how do you quantify that? I read that there are mitigations in place, but how do you quantify that? How serious it is? To me, when I say 2017, that seems, well, quite an issue.
So there's a little bit of context in that. I mean, I think there is something about strengthening some of our record keeping and governance around policies in any case. But actually what we've actually done is we've moved it more into the disaster recovery plan rather than the BCIS. So over time, the disaster recovery plan has effectively become our document. So we have an updated version of that, which contains, and because we've moved to cloud services and various other things, that's become much more, and IT is our biggest exposure. That's become our primary document. What this internal audit has pointed out, that actually there are one or two aspects of the BCIS that we really ought to be retaining. So actually, more than having a BCIS, what we need to do is actually have a disaster recovery document that contains a couple of those elements in the BCIS in it. So what we've done in principle by moving to the disaster recovery document isn't wrong. It's just that actually there are probably a couple of elements out of that BCIS that we ought to have had. What we were able to prove in the internal audit is in theory we still have a BCIS, but yes, it's from 2017. So it shows that we never considered those aspects. But it's helped us to understand that actually we can't just run just with the disaster recovery document. We need to build a couple of those elements, particularly I think around responsibilities for particular actions into the DRS document.
Okay, thank you. Just on one point, there was I believe there was a bit on accounting where some things were written down and others weren't written down, and just going forward. I know there's a new system in place which maybe isn't quite up and running as 100% as it should be. Is that going to be looked at again, like next year, just to make sure it's fully compliable with everything, or
it's already an ongoing process anyway. I think the system that we've got now, so when we had the previous finance system, it had purchase orders within it, but it didn't have a proper goods receipting process actually built into the system itself. We probably had a fairly ad hoc purchase order system in terms of weren't really stringent on no purchase order, no pay. So a lot of organisations now move to a no purchase order, no pay system, where if the invoice doesn't quote a purchase order, you don't pay it until it does. And that just ensures you've got that front end control. I think at the moment, what we've inherited is what we probably had from Sun. So there's a couple of aspects to this. One is raising purchase orders in a timely fashion up front. So that being raised before the invoice arrives. So we're getting the timings right, rather than the invoice coming and then somebody raising the purchase order. The goods receipting previously was done by email. So somebody in finance would email the person, say, have you got it? Are you happy with it? They'd email back and then it would get paid. That's now built into the system. But culturally, there's something about that. Goods receipting has to be done by the operational person receiving the goods. So they have to go in the system and do that. That's very different to what before was a finance-driven process by email. So culturally, there is quite a big shift there that we need to do that we're not quite on top of yet, which is to get that really proactive goods receipting happening. So we need quite a lot of retraining. It's something we knew about already. We know about purchase order as well, not being at no purchase order, no pay levels, which we need to get it to. So it's kind of highlighted a couple of areas that we know are, if you like, the second phase of getting the system working. So the system is all set for that. It's the people part of it and the use of it part of it that we need to tighten up.
Right. Thank you. Go on, Tom.
So, no, just to add to that, I suppose, on what Pete said in terms of would we be coming back to it next year. Obviously, we've agreed actions with Pete and the team around these kind of issues. So during this year, we'll follow up with them to confirm that those actions have been taken so that these issues have been addressed. So wouldn't necessarily come back into the audit plan.
Yeah.
But we report on it through the follow-up process to confirm that things have been addressed.
No, thank you very much. Yeah. Any more comments? Well, thank you very much, Tom, for coming along, and well, thank you to Tom and Pete for such a good audit as well, and yourself. You know, it's good when you have good audits. It's certainly not so good when you have a load of bits that you think, oh well, that could be better and that could be better, and hellfire, what we're doing here. But thank you very much. You know, it's good to know that we're on track and moving forward. Thank you. If we can move on to item 8, which is external audit strategy memorandum. We will welcome Nicola Hollis to give us the update, and welcome. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you. So just before I run through the ASM, I'll just take a moment to introduce myself. So I'm Nicola, the engagement lead, taking over from Gavin following his retirement. I am an experienced public sector auditor. I held a handover meeting with Gavin before he retired, and we've already met officers, so hopefully you'll see a smooth transition. I'll also introduce Rejoice as audit manager, and she's replacing Gaurav previously. So in terms of the audit strategy memorandum, this sets out the scope and timing of the audit and details the significant risks we've identified. I will take the report as read, but I'll just highlight a few key areas before I take questions. So the audit approach remains largely unchanged from prior years. The significant risks are similar. We've set our materiality based on the 24-25 accounts being the latest accounts, and then we'll revisit it on receipt of the 25-26 accounts. The benchmark of expenditure and also the threshold is unlikely to change unless something drastically happens between when we receive the 25-26 accounts. We haven't yet completed our risk assessment in terms of the value for money work, but from the work we've done to date, we haven't identified any risk of significant weakness to bring to your attention. If that changes, we will obviously report to yourselves. We're aiming to complete our audit fieldwork during July to September with audit completion planned for November. This is subject to receipt of the pension fund assurance, which I'm sure you've all experienced. I'll just hand over to Rejoice to run through the significant risks and then take questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I'll just speak on the significant risks that we have identified. I think these are largely unchanged from prior year, and I think we have 3 main ones, which is management override of controls, and the net defined benefit pension, and also the valuation of land and buildings, and also heritage assets. And I think we've got a slight change in this year as the code now requires the valuation of land and buildings to also include indexation. So that's also an area that we're going to be focusing on this year, is this changes. I think we're fine with that for now, and we can take questions.
Thank you very much. Have we any questions? Please.
Thank you very much indeed. So Pete, does that, with the increase in the new thing really with the buildings and everything, does that change what you and your team need to do prior to the field work coming in, or is it already there?
It does, yeah. So this is around the valuation of our land and buildings. As it says, we do a full valuation every 5 years. So last year we did the full valuation of all of our land and buildings. Previously, what we would have done is we would have done a rolling desktop exercise over the next 5 years of choosing 5 or 6 of our largest properties, getting those fully valued, and the rest only by exception where something is physically changed. That's what we've done previously. This now requires us to index them. Now, I think in theory it was meant to save us time and resource. It was meant to make life easier. So the idea was you would just take all of your assets and you just index link increase them by an appropriate index over those 4 years, then do a full valuation. In theory, by doing that, you don't have to do any part valuations. It just allows you to index. I think there's been a lot of confusion over recent months about exactly what that indexation looks like. I think for both auditors and for ourselves and for SITFA, I think we're only just getting a little bit of clarity that really it's a management judgment about what index you use, but actually each of your assets is different categories. So your car park's different from Spout House, different from this property is different from Sutton Bank. They're all different types of properties with different uses. So then you have to use different indexes. So actually what it transpires to be is we need to use our valuers still every year. So I think the idea is it would save us necessarily needing to use our valuers. We still do, because a lot of those indexes we don't have access to. So we still need to use our valuers to go in and tell us kind of what the appropriate indexes would be, and then make a management call about whether we think they're appropriate or not. So I think that idea that it was going to save us resource is not going to do that. I think you'll still have the valuer costs associated with it and the management judgment as well.
It sounds like we might have higher valuer costs if we're not just doing 1 or 2 areas and we've got to do them all.
Potentially, I think what the valuer will do is they will provide us with a list of the properties, what index is appropriate to those, and then they'll provide us with the indexation for those because they have access to all of the different indexes. We'll then make a bit of a judgment call and a discussion with them about whether we think that's the right index to use, and then we'll apply that. So it may well still be that it's a little bit less resource, but that's to be seen at the moment. So we've commissioned them to do that work. It's to be seen what the bill looks like on the back end of it. So it's a little bit of experimental for everybody, I think, and actually all the parks have been discussing about that approach that we'll take in a coordinated way between Section 151s. Because at the moment they're all finding what's going to be the right way to do it. And I think we've had some discussions with auditors as well to try and test the water about whether or not that's the right approach or not. I think we'll find out as we go through the audit, but we'll take what we think is the common sense approach.
Right, Jim, please.
On that point, Chair, I think we have to have those values for insurance purposes anyway.
Insurance values are different values to what you use within the accounts. So the insurance values are rebuild values in effect. So they're actually different to what we use for accounting purposes.
Thank you. Just as we move forward, I know you said we had a valuation last year. Now, with the new build coming on bit by bit, does that mean, do we not have to include that in the valuation as it's going along, or do we just wait for the 5 years till everything's sorted out one way or another to what the valuations are?
So in my view, at the moment, we've got two buildings in effect. We've got the depot, which is, as we know now, mostly built, just waiting for connection. That for the depot, we will have the build cost of what that's cost in actuality. So I think our view is that we take that as the value, so how much it's actually cost to build that on what we already had on there in terms of the cost of the land, and then index link that as appropriate. But given that it's only just been built this year, we probably don't need to index that, and then we'll index that in future years. But these are the judgment calls across each property that we need to make. The HQ at the moment isn't built at all yet, so that would still be the cost of the land. So we'll index that land as appropriate on the right index.
Thank you. Any more comments? Go on, George.
Just on the very last comment that you mentioned.
Yeah, agree. I need to make a bit of a judgment call, and it might be a discussion I have with Nicola at some point and Rejoice about how we approach that particular building. My view at the moment is always about what's the best from a accuracy point of view and a resource point of view, balance the two. And I think if we can get to a pragmatic position of doing it at cost and then indexing, but it's probably worth me getting an audit view to make sure that that won't create an issue at the other end. So yeah, these are all the individual judgment calls you have to make. It's a really good point.
Thank you. Have we any more comments? Well, thank you very much for coming along. I hope this audit goes well with you as well as it does with us. You know, I'm sure our staff are brilliant, so they'll work with you as best we can, same as we did with Gavin. But anyway, all the best, and thank you very much for coming along and updating us today. If is Ellen here? I don't know actually. If we move on to external funding, do we go a bit further? Wait for Ellen to come in.
I think we'll just wait for Ellen to join us, but maybe just to cover one thing. Normally we would bring to members, or certainly have over the course of the last 18 months or so, a combined external funding report with a dashboard just summarising progress and a RAG rating in relation to the delivery of projects. That's heavily reliant on our project manager, Mark Young, being able to kind of compile that. And as many of you know, Mark had an operation back at Easter, which has meant that he's been out of operation for the best part of the month or so. And whilst he's back in work now, we just didn't have the time to pull together the project dashboard. So it's just the external funding update. As SLT, we're continuing to monitor progress and scrutinise delivery of projects, and at the next quarterly FRASC we'll bring the project dashboard back to members again. So I'll hand over to Ellen to cover the external funding report.
Thank you. Welcome, Ellen. Thank you for coming along, and look forward to your report.
No problem, thank you. So just to give the usual update on where we are with external funding, there's been quite a lot of changes since the report was created about a month ago, so I'll give those at the same time. As you'll see from figure 1, we have sort of nearly reached the £2 million mark for securing funding in that financial year. So that's when we have the grant offers placed with us in that year, and that's that total value. And we come on to how that's spent over the coming years in the future figure later on in the report. So I just wanted to skip through the applications that we have submitted to Q4, which this report relates to. So those that we are awaiting a decision in the 2.2 table. However, we've had quite a good result with lots of these. So you may have seen in the press on, I think it was Thursday, the Combined Authority created a press release informing everybody about the outcome of these funds. So we were successful with the Natural Health Service through the Active Travel Fund, and I come on to a bit more detail about this one and the next one in the report as well. So we secured that funding of just shy of 500,000. alongside the inclusive travel programme, which is around 130,000, working on the cinder track improvements and also some adaptive bikes for the national park. We submitted a bid to Ganton Education Trust. They're a really good sort of regular funder for us, but we have to bid for that work as it's always competitive. But we have actually secured that £5,000 for Heather's team for outdoor learning, which is good news. The wildfire recovery, so the Fylingdales restoration, we're working with DEFRA and Natural England on funding for that through the peat restoration grant. So that is currently in conversation with them. I don't know if we wanted to explore that in a bit more detail, but we can pass on to Tom if you did. And then we have the Coast to Coast Nature Corridor. This has actually been awarded now. So the Coast to Coast application we supported, but it's actually led by the Lake District National Park. We don't have a specific allocation in that, but we're a major partner, obviously, with our element of the Coast to Coast being part of that. And then with Generation Green 3, so we've had previous really lovely projects that Generation 1 and Generation Green 2, wanting to extend that into a further 3. And we are currently working with a big partnership across the national parks and wider partners for a bid to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for that. And as I reported previously before, the Youth Hostel Association were the lead applicant for that bid, which would have seen us secure around 120,000 for our part in that project. However, Youth Hostel Association have pulled out just because of changing in staff. However, since the report, we have got a new partner that is agreed to be the lead body, but I won't let people know who that is yet because it's not public knowledge until it's firmed for sure. But just wanted to say that there is hope that that application will actually be moving forward for the deadline of November this year to the National Lottery Heritage Fund. So that's good news. So we're working on that now. Additionally, there's the table 2.3. We have recently funded other projects. So the Active Travel England, so that supports the other active travel projects that we will be running as well now. We have secured funding from Active Travel England, the project that Dom led on, so that's the 200,000. Young Rangers have had some funding from AMAX, and then we've had other funding which I think I've reported on before for other projects. So I'll just skip on to the wildfire. Since the last FRASC, we have received funding from Airbnb. We were really pleased with this, particularly because there was about 6,500 applications for this pot of money, and we were one of about 25 projects funded nationally for an arts and culture project in the national park. And I've put it under wildfire because the whole focus was about increasing tourism after the wildfire's negative impact. So we wanted to sort of focus on that, and I think that was the sort of niche that about the project that really sort of raised their ears and thought that it would be something worthwhile to fund. And then we have finished these two projects now because they were to March 2026, and we've sent off the reports to those funders for the Environment Agency and Natural England. And we have also, as reported before, had funding from the Combined Authority. So those projects that are in development, so 2.5, this has been the main piece of work now. So over the summer and the rest of the spring, we'll be working on the full application to the National Lottery Heritage Fund for More Connected. So we're sort of working at pace now, so getting working with local communities on what they would like from the project. So going out to consultation around that just to refine things a bit more, and working with partners now on elements that they would like to take forward. So that would be quite a large project. The total project would be around 15 million over the 10 years, with an element of funding from the National Lottery Heritage Fund. Then you've got the UK Fund application that has now since been submitted to the National Lottery Community Fund, and that's partnership of 15 national parks, which I've put in more detail in previous reports about what that project involves. But we're pleased now that that's now been submitted as an EOI, and if we should get an outcome within the next 12 weeks of whether that will go through to full application stage or not. If not, we'll resubmit and keep trying. Then we've had some unsuccessful news. So we were unfortunately not successful with the Arts Council England bid, which we submitted for the second time following the first rejection. However, with the Airbnb funding, we're quite happy with work that can be delivered around the arts and culture partnership activity. So this is really disappointing, and we have decided not to submit a bid again to the Arts Council, just because they're in a little bit of a funny place at the moment with their funding and perceptions around how they're delivering that fund. So we want to wait a while to see that things sort of level out a bit for the Arts Council, and then resubmit if they change the way they deliver funding. And then we did go to Yorkshire Water for some funding, but we were unsuccessful with that. But that's not unusual. Yorkshire Water invest in the authority for quite substantial sums already, so I think that they're giving other organisations a chance. And then I've sort of highlighted a bit more detail about the active travel projects that we now know we've been successful with. So it's a really exciting programme of activity for the National Park and the partners across the other protected landscapes. So we have obviously that active travel funding for Dom and his work, so he'll be recruiting an active travel officer to take that forward. And then we have the Natural Health Service, which is obviously an initiative that was created by the Trust and really pushed forward by the Trust. And we became the accountable body because the Active Travel Fund through the combined authority was only open to national parks of that sort of size of grant. So charities could only apply for up to 50,000. So it left the Trust with not being able to apply for the larger fund that was needed for that programme. So we're taking that forward as now, and that will be celebrated in June with a proper launch of that project. And we're also working on the improvements on the cinder track, so that project will start in the summer, and both of those projects will finish in January 2028. So we're really chuffed with how that's happened. And then you've got 2.8, which is the spend profile. So as I mentioned before, we secure the funding in the year, but then obviously it's spent throughout the future years. So that just gives you an idea of the allocation of that funding over the business plan period. And it's looking, healthy, and we're obviously over the funding target set for the authority. And I think that's about it.
Thank you, Alan. It's good to see everything's moving forward at a pace. If I could start questions, no, it's not normal. On Generation Green, you said our share was 121,000. What were we going to do with our share of that? Just moving forward as to what were we going to do with it, or how we were going to...
So at the moment, that was just an expression of interest. The detail behind that will be formed over the summer for all of the delivery partners, what they're going to deliver. But essentially, it's working with young people, so it'll be accelerating the Young Rangers and the Family Explorer works, and making sure that families and young people are coming to the National Park, working with the deprived areas as a focus. And just accelerating that work with more staff, hopefully, but it's yet to be decided. So,
okay, thank you. Any more? Oh, Jane, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Very comprehensive. I've got two sort of slight sort of comment questions, please. Is there a policy or something that we have that we look into businesses or firms, or how do we go, well, we're happy to partner with Airbnb, for example, because how do we know that their branding, their ethos, their everything aligns up with us? And it's not just Airbnb, it's anybody commercially that we go with, because obviously you said something about the Arts Council in a bit of problem at the moment. How have you done your analysis to say the Arts Council, but not to say, you know, anything about any other business? I just wanted to know what the sort of background to these were, please, as question one, sorry.
No, it's a good question. So we use NPP, have a framework that we use for making sure that the companies that we go to are, you know, ethically minded and all of the sort of tick boxes that you need to make sure. So we have rejected some previously before because of that problem. So we get a lot of guidance from NPP around that. So I think
NPP.
Oh, sorry, National Parks Partnership. So they are really specialists in corporate partnership work. So we use them for a lot of guidance around that. In relation to Arts Council, the decision is really made because of the balance between the amount of work it takes to submit that bid and the amount of funding that will actually be secured if we were successful. So for an Arts Council bid, I would probably say it takes 3 solid weeks of work full time to submit a bid to them, and that's quite disproportionate to the amount of £37,000 that we would acquire. So you have to sort of take that into account as well when you're considering these funds. And because they're in a little bit of flux at the moment, I think there is a potential that they would change their focus for where they target their funding in the future. So I want to wait until that sort of levels out a little bit. The recommendations from the report that Baroness, I can't remember her name, was able to has just finished. So just want to wait for that.
Perfect. That led straight on to the other thing I was going to ask is for the £10 million project, where you said we were sort of in, you know, development phase. That leads for exactly the thing is how much time, energy, staff time is going in, and where is that funding coming from at the moment to put that in, and how much is being put into it, if you see what I mean. So in a way that exactly leads on from what you've just said versus the other ones.
Yeah. So we don't get funding from any funders, from grant funders for my work, for example, because it's retrospective funding. So you can't ever ask a funder to fund the development, like the pre-development side of submitting a bid, unfortunately. But it's all time that's funded, you know, out of core really for my time. But there's a huge team involved in this at the moment, so it's not just internally within the National Park Authority, it's also the Howardian Hills and also the partners. So like Bug Life, they have a team of about 4 people that are working on it at the moment as well, and that's all time and kind from there because they can see the benefits and the potential for this, for meeting, you know, all of the strategy objectives that they have, but also the National Park.
So if we didn't get it, how much money versus terms of time core would we have lost?
Well, we're actually calculating that, so we're logging our time now, so we will be able to let you know. So but you know, it's all work that we need to do in order to make it successful. There isn't any other way of attacking it really. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Just a word from Tom.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, it may be self-evident, but I'll say anyway. I think this is a really important point for members to understand that our strategy to grow the authority by becoming project-based depends on us being able to leverage core DEFRA grant funding. And it's that ability to lean on core DEFRA grant funding to fund not just the work that Ellen does, but that our officers contribute to the development of that project pipeline that makes it indispensable. So whilst we've been very resourceful as an organisation over many years in finding ways of managing that, we still rely on that core funding to be able to leverage staff time to be able to submit compelling funding bids. For something like the National Lottery Heritage Fund's Landscape Connections programme. That's a long-term fund, that is available to projects of a reasonable amount of funding. It's worth it if we're successful. Now, members will be aware that we did submit a proposal under the same framework a couple of years ago. We weren't successful. We dusted ourselves down, refocused and reframed the project, and are going again. Some other national park authorities have received funding under that programme, but we're convinced it's right for us to invest the time and effort into shaping a funding bid for resubmission later on this year.
Thank you.
Patrick?
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Ellen. This is, as always, it's so impressive the amount of work we do here, and fantastic news, recent news about all this active travel, natural health service work that's coming in. I like it. I've got 3 small questions. 2.4, Wildlife Recovery Fund. I noticed Historic England, I think they gave around £100,000, but that's not in this table. Is it worth having a table that just reminds us how much money we have raised for wildfire recovery, or is the Historic England grant an omission?
Yeah, I think I've left that out by mistake. So yeah, we do have that on top, but I think it was reported previously. But yes, that is on top of that. So we would, but the graph is correct, I think.
Thank you. And were there any? There might be other wildfire grants. I don't know. It's just be interesting to know what the total so far has been that we've raised. Point 1. Point 2. Levisham. That's external funding. I think we're applying for quite a big grant from Natural England. Does that come into this report? Is that a separate pot?
Yeah, I should have put that one in as well.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, that was a huge project that we've submitted. Well, it was led by Hannah, so we need to put that.
That's quite a significant amount for us, I think.
Yes, I can't remember the total figure though.
No, but it's a decent big grant, I think. And is there any news on that?
It's only just been submitted, so it was a huge portfolio that Hannah worked on for, up until the deadline was about 2 weeks ago, so that's just been submitted. So yeah.
Well, just as a follow-up note, if it would be possible to know what that amount is, just be interested to know, Chair. Finally, 2.8, fantastic. We've got in development £10 million application, but just the graph says in development, it looks like less than £1 million.
That's just in year, so this is on spend in that year rather than the total.
Right, it's not the total that's in development to apply for.
No, so that's what will be spent in that year. So of the projects that are being developed.
Thank you. So I just wonder whether that for this committee, should we have, we're up to 26, 27, should there be one more column, i.e. for the 27, 28 where
we've talked about that just because it's the business plan period, so it's sort of made it tidy. So, but we can, depending on where we get to with the business plan and how that's being developed, we can put in, we're going to have to put in future years, aren't we? So
that's brilliant. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. That's all. Thank you very much.
Pete, did you want to come in? It's all right. Okay. Go on, Tom.
Yeah, I can clarify on Lincoln Levisham. You're right to pick us up on that, Patrick. I should have spotted that we should have included it. The project was submitted at the end of April to Natural England as the funding body. I think part of the reason why it may well have been a blind spot for both Ellen and I is because it's part of the Elms scheme, so it's the sort of third tier of Elms. But the development phase is now concluded of that, with a view to going in as a partnership, a consortium, to a 20-year landscape recovery programme covering Levisham, Newtondale and the surrounding area. Members will be aware that the joint forum meeting that we have forthcoming will be at Levisham to talk about the Lincoln Levisham project. Now we've waited. There is a fairly lengthy process between now and hopefully, touch wood, and I'm genuinely touching wood, getting confirmation from DEFRA / Natural England of project clarification, assurance and negotiation to go through, which has only just started. So at the moment, Natural England will be in the clarification stage of making sure that the application, the documentation that's been submitted as part of the development phase is complete. So that's the first stage, and then there'll be a further assurance process. based on the projects that have been approved so far, and I think only 3 landscape recovery projects have been given the go-ahead, it could take a good 6 months for that period of time to elapse.
Tom, Christine?
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so I think Patrick's already touched on the point about kind of forecasting out, which I think would be really helpful for us to see. And at some point, I know we do get this information gradually as these things come into play, but something about the detail of, we've had a lot of concerns in the past about the administrative overheads, etc. And it would be interesting to get kind of that whole picture about the grants in terms of RDEL, CDEL, administrative breakdown. But anyway, my main point, Ellen, was because this is always my favorite part of these meetings, because every time I look at this, I'm so impressed with what we're able to achieve, that we're always exceeding our targets, which are actually pretty demanding, and finding that balance where we're not tipped over into things that we can't deliver, but meeting and exceeding, in fact, the targets that we've set. So I just really wanted to congratulate you and the rest of the folks that obviously contribute to this work, for continuing year on year to achieve everything that you do. So thank you.
Thank you. Right, Jim.
Thanks, Chair. I'd just like to go. Patrick's making money fast, isn't he? Well done, Patrick. But a couple of points. As Tom said, match funding takes resource, and it's really important that we put enough resource in to make that happen. It's also important that we have that resource to partner other delivery people on the ground, because if you say to somebody on the ground to arrange it, for instance, you've got to get match funding, that can take a significant resource out of their day when they should be going and doing stuff on the ground. So it's important that we have the match funding team able to partner the people building the bids, as opposed to, we could actually lose delivery just by chasing rainbows, so to speak. So I think that is a point that it is a resource that we need to factor into what we core grant. The other thing, just on collective bids are great. Well done for that. I hope there's a good delivery agreement too. And on the Pilendales Fire in particular, we're gathering quite a lot of bids and project delivery on a place that doesn't belong to us, and is a triple SI. And I just wonder, what the landowner's obligations are, and what happens, who's responsible for the delivering. If I get a DEFRA grant and I don't do the work in 5 years, I have to pay something back, or all that stuff. How are we making sure that the landowner's obligations, or what securities there are for that when we're getting money from other people?
Just get Tom to come in on that.
Yeah, no, I'll come in on that, because it is a really good point. It's the land in question that's affected by the wildfire is not land that the National Park Authority owns. Nonetheless, I think members and directors, we feel that it's right for the authority to play a leading role in coordinating efforts around the obtaining the funding, at least for restoration. But you're absolutely right, Jim. The primary responsibility for land and meeting any statutory obligations that pertain to it don't rest with the authority; they rest with the landowner. And we seek to ensure that we are not only conducting our work in pursuing funding and developing restoration plans by close coordination with the landowner, in this case primarily the landowner's agent, and with the common rights graziers, the Filendales Court League, but also ensure that they're reminded of their own obligations and follow them through. So, for example, I know there's a particular issue over fencing at the moment relating to the common land, which has to be the responsibility of the commoners to pursue, not the authority.
Sorry, off yourself. Any more comments? Malcolm?
Thanks. Yeah, just a couple of small ones, I think. I mean, in terms of what resource we're putting into all these bids, I think actually it's quite difficult to quantify it in some ways, because we've always heard before that, I mean, we we look at the work that needs to be done, and then so there's an amount of work and there's teams doing that sort of thing. Then it's a matter of picking the right person to go to. And if you fail on the first one, then you use that work and go to the second one. So, you know, the work's been, it's not as though there's a lot of work done to that. You don't get the grant and therefore that work's gone. It just goes into other things. So it's not easy to put numbers on some of this sometimes, but I entirely agree with what Jim said. Just a couple of other minor things. The Arts Council, I mean, they're clearly going through some sort of change at the moment, so I can appreciate that. But when we did the arts strategy, we did say that one of the reasons for that was to develop a long-term relationship with the Arts Council. So I'm pleased that we're going to be going back to them once they've got things in a better state of order, should we say, that you're thinking that we can do. And just the final point was about the Young Rangers. We had a really useful forum meeting a while back, and at that, and you've got it here, that there's one grant for the Young Rangers goes up to September. There's another one that we didn't get, and I mentioned at that meeting that it doesn't seem right that we struggle to fund the Young Rangers, and we ought to have some sort of contingency for if you can't fund them after September. There must be a bit of money somewhere in the budget that you can do to carry you forward. I don't want to answer to that now, but I think the general point is that at the forum meeting, members thought the Young Rangers is by definition a good thing to do, and to have it almost hanging by a thread in case, you know, dependent on getting money from somebody we're not sure who, isn't a great position to be. So I think we need to think of how we deal with that eventuality.
Yeah, an element of the Young Rangers is funded through core, but we sort of add value to it through the grants, so that it will still continue whether we get additional funding or not. It's just making sure that we use the grants as targeting it to specific groups. So that's what we say to, which is really appealing to funders, because we can say we're working with groups in Scarborough, for example, to bring them into the National Park, or Tees Valley, whichever their interests are for geographically. So, but yes, but we're also recruiting a project manager, development manager as well. So Joel's working on that to bring a bit more resource into the team to develop projects for the health and wellbeing strategy delivery. Which would be really exciting, so we can work alongside that person when that happens.
Yeah, and Joe was at the meeting, so he knows what we've been talking about. So thank you, that's a lot clearer. Thank you.
Okay.
Joel?
Firstly, on the Arts Council point, thank you, Malcolm, because you're absolutely right that this is not just simply about us trying to get a bit of money out of the Arts Council. This was actually us as an organisation on behalf of the Arts and Culture Partnership trying to develop a relationship and a partnership with what is one of the four main lottery funding bodies. And the idea with this was that it was a way to step into their space and understand their needs and find a way that we could work together. I mean, unfortunately, if you do read the Hodge review, it is absolutely devastating in terms of the criticism that it levels at the Arts Council. You know, phrases used like it acts as a straitjacket, it stifles artistic innovation and creativity. People felt that they were simply ticking boxes to secure funding rather than actually explaining their vision, and that too often there was no connection between artistic work and excellence. And it really is difficult, and unfortunately they had a real problem with their grants administration. They had a scheme called Grantium, which has meant that we couldn't actually apply for a number of months because they actually had to close that down. So I'm afraid they're an organisation which really do have to do a lot more work in order to be in a space where we feel like we're talking about the time it involves, and Ellen mentioned that for us to go back to them. We will. One of the things that does give me a glimmer of hope, which the Hodge report recommends, is that decision making for the kinds of funds that we have should be devolved even further, possibly down to mayoral combined authority level, and have more representatives of the community. Because the perception I've got, unfortunately, is that I don't think the Arts Council really understood what the Arts and Culture Partnership were doing here. We're a rural area. The kind of artists that we have may not be congruent with their approach nationally, but we are still here in this area with huge artistic ambition, and unfortunately, despite some early engagement with officers, we've struggled to get them to understand that. And when our application was put in, it was probably assessed by somebody that didn't really have any connection or understanding of not just the North York Moors, but possibly of Yorkshire or rural areas. So you can see why we've lost confidence in going back in at this stage. So we'll watch and await events, because we would still like to have a partnership with the Arts Council, but they've got a lot of work to do on the basis of the Hodge Review. Just in respect of young rangers, I wouldn't want it said that they're hanging by a thread, because the funding model that we operate is that we will always commit to ensure that the Young Ranger programme can go ahead with a full range of activities. We try and support it wherever possible, not just through staff resource, but also through volunteer resource. And we actually have two members of staff who've come up through our Young Ranger programme previously, who are now acting as kind of supporters as well, which is a really cost-effective model. As always, we look for external funding to replace the core wherever we can. And I think the one thing I'd just like to make clear is that when we said that there was no funding currently in the forum discussion, that meant about the external funding being secured, and obviously we have now. We will always ensure that Young Rangers can operate effectively, but like all core funded services, we do have to keep looking at ways in which we can generate external income or other ways to offset core. And that's the challenge that the officers in my team have got. But ultimately, we are very committed to Young Rangers, and we've never liked them to feel that it was precarious. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, George. Oh, go on, George.
Just further to the point that Tom mentioned regarding the wildfires, I mean, as soon as the wildfires happened, we did talk about the importance of the North York Moors to take a leading role in this, and I, at a personal level, have been pleased with the level of engagement and involvement that we have had since. But just to go further, I think, than Tom, I would say it is within our statute duty to enhance and conserve those areas, even if the land is not ours. So we've got to continue with this leading role. It's not optional as much as statutory, and obviously we want to do it as well.
Which proportion are we leading on wildfires?
So we're leading all of the work around the restoration and recovery of the moorland. We're not doing this in isolation. We're doing that with a group of stakeholders who are either landowners, land managers, or have an association with the land in question. And that's set up under the aegis of the recovery coordination group that has been facilitated by the Local Resilience Forum under North Yorkshire Council. Very good example of partnership working, I hasten to add.
Moving forward, any more comments for Ellen? Thank you, Ellen. Yes, a really good report, and thank you very much again. I know you'll like Mark to get back next FRASC and give update on progress of these projects. But thank you, and I know there's a lot of staff time as well involved in putting these projects together and before they're actually submitted. So thank you very much anyway. If we can move on to item 10, the draft annual governance statement. Pete, I'll leave that with you.
Yes, this is the document that we bring annually to this meeting ahead of us publishing it on the website, and it's undergoing external audit process. It reflects, it's something that every sort of local government has to do, a national park has to do, and it covers our governance structures, covers our governance setup, covers the actions that we said we would undertake this year and what actions we will undertake in 26-27. And it lays out things such as if there's been any member changes, if there's any been member complaints, and anything in the governance structures such as parish councils, etc., and forums, that have been changing over the course of the year. So the document lays that out. We do bring that to this particular May one so that we can publish it in line with the accounts, and then the auditors will review that following. So I'll take it as read in terms of the report. Happy to answer any questions on it. And I think the recommendation is for members to comment on that, and if there's any amendments to make to that, subject to members' comments, I can make those before we publish online.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, just looking at 4.3, the Light Touch Best Value Review. I know North Yorkshire Council's just had one. I'm not going to go on how we did pretty well on it, but is this a statutory requirement, Pete? I mean, it looks like we're going to push it back to 2026, 27, probably the right thing to do with all the new computer software, blah, blah. But is this sort of like you've got to do it every 5 years, or, I mean, you know, this Best Value Review?
It's something that was the product of guidance that came out that everybody or every sort of local government body ought to undertake. I think before my predecessor said that we would bring in 25-26 a light touch review of best value for the authority on the basis of the documentation that had come out. It's something that in the course of the year I've just pushed back to 26-27 on the basis of a number of other things we were delivering in 25-26. But it is something as a body we ought to do. It's something that will test whether we're delivering value as an authority in various places, particularly around governance. So it is something we ought to undertake. It's something I did deprioritise from 25-26 on the basis of new systems coming in and a number of other things. But
sorry, going back on that, when I say, whilst it's not statutory, it's what we should be doing as part of governance. I accept that. So, where's the have we done one before? It's the first I've seen of this, but I mean, is it something that we've done
I'm not
before?
sure. I think we've done versions of it. I mean, I think there's been various things that have come out before, but I think there was a report around best value that kind of instigated this kind of review to be undertaken. But we have, as part of external audit, as part of internal audit, we do a number of things around our governance and value for money. And indeed, external audit, the value for money element of it will cover, I think, quite a lot of elements that this will as well. But it's something that we ought to do to be comprehensive in ensuring our governance is appropriate.
I accept that, but that's what audit's supposed to be about. I accept that, but it's the official ticking thing. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Heather. Have any more comments at the moment? Can we move on to the recommendation? Members comment and approve the draft government statement for publication of the draft financial accounts at the end of June. Is all in favour? Thank you. Excellent. Thanks, Jane. If move on to item 11, the quarterly performance scorecard. We've got Kate.
We don't have Kate unfortunately with us today, so I'm going to pick this up before Pete goes into a fairly lengthy update on the outturn. So the quarterly performance scorecard is presented to you, and I'll take it largely as read, but perhaps just highlight a couple of things that are drawn out by the key performance indicators that we're certainly tracking as a management team. So the first would relate to the indicators in relation to our profile and media presence, particularly social media. And you'll see that engagements, impressions, and video views have decreased again. So that's the second quarter in which we've seen a decrease in those indicators. We're not unduly concerned around that. Certainly, if you look at impressions, the number is significantly more elevated on a quarterly basis than it was three or four years ago. But it is something that working with our communications team will keep a close eye on. I certainly want to look at what the next quarter's numbers indicate, because it may well be an indication that our audience is changing the way it interacts with us. it may well be an indication that we need to adapt and change the way that we do some of our social media to innovate and make sure it's more engaging. At this stage, I don't know. I won't want to kind of put any particular judgment on that, but certainly when we spoke at the last FRASC, we were a person down within the team. That role has been filled. So, and I know certainly from my point of view, the team members doing some brilliant work in terms of the quality of the content that she's putting out. So we just want to keep an eye on that. The second would be, as highlighted in Kate's report on volunteers, we reached a landmark, having done a bit of cleansing of achieving 500 active volunteers for the first time since we were tracking that particular KPI, which is good to see, and we'll see whether that is sustained in future quarters. And then lastly, not drawn out in Kate's report, but you'll see it in the indicators, is just the visitor centre footfall. I think we're particularly pleased to see the compound increase in footfall at both visitor centres, but in particular at Danby Lodge, over 80,000 visitors, which is a tremendous achievement, and I think makes us all feel duly justified in the investment that members have previously approved into improving the quality and the offer at the site. So I think we're all really proud of that. So leave it there, Chair.
Thank you. Any comments? Go on, Jim.
Yeah, it was just like Tom said on the uplifted Danby. I was there the other day, and it was a lovely day. That the playground was full. There were people doing stuff. The gallery looks great. My sister was in there doing an exhibition, which was nice to see as well. And Sally Smith, who used to run it, was there having a look about. Not nice to see that, but it takes. There's quite a lot of work. There's quite a lot of work in maintaining those links, and different people come there for different reasons. I sat there in the lobby watching fantastic film of all the beautiful parts of the national park, and as I sometimes accosted unfortunate visitors to ask them what they thought and whether they were enjoying themselves. And people come there for all sorts of different reasons, and so I think understanding that is a key to the success. Hope it continues. Well done on that.
Thanks. Oh, go on, Jane.
Thank you for that. Can I just have a little clarification, please? Or perhaps we can get this from elsewhere. I know that we've had a bit of dip, but you say that there may be revised upwards in subsequent quarters for the volunteering. I just wanted to know what is sort of our volunteering sort of as compared to other parks, just to give us an idea of how well or not we're doing. And secondly, how much staff time do we, again, compared to other parks, is used for the number of hours? It was just to get a bit of sort of from other places, because I think at the moment I'm looking at this in a bit just on its own.
I think I have prepped Claire in case there's any volunteering questions, but they may be ones we need to do a bit more extra work on. So that might be what we take away and come back to. Yeah.
It is fine. It's just It's something I think it would be good to know compared to other parks and things.
Yeah, no, we'll come back to you on that.
Thank you.
I know I was at the 50th anniversary at Danby Lodge, and like some of the visitors going round were saying, it's brilliant to see something that could attend without having to pay for it, because, and they would come back, and I know the playground, like Jim said, was absolutely jam-packed, and, that was brilliant, really. And I do believe there's something similar planned for Sutton Bank. Is there?
Already been done, I'm afraid, Chair. The 50th anniversary was on Good Friday.
I mean the playground rather than anniversary.
You've got me there, Joel. I know we've got a bit of it. It's not quite the same as at Danby, is it? In terms of the Sutton Bank, there's a kind of play area out the back of the centre. I don't know what weather or what plans we have over it. So maybe you can answer.
There is a kind of seated basket swing, which is reasonably accessible, and some low-level equipment. There's no actual plan for a full-scale playground, but one thing we do know from the Danby experience is, again, if you can do that, then it will act as an attraction for families. I think the area we've got to be considerate of, especially in that space behind the centre, is obviously the impact it may have on the actual natural environment in that area. So anything we do has always got to be sensitively thought through and planned and at the right scale. But it is something we will consider given the role of active play and families as part of our engagement strategy.
Okay, thank you. Go on, Clive.
The only problem I found with Danby one, 50 was parking. For the one time, everywhere was full. It was parking on, say, street parking, right down to Duck Bridge. It was amazing, absolutely amazing day anyway. It was a very good day. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it's just to say it's nice to have a problem like that to deal with when for many years we've been saying, what on earth are we doing to get visitors there? But it does give rise to the fact that obviously in our capital programme we want to make more formal use of the overflow car park, and we will consider contingencies for major events. I'm aware we've had a little bit of criticism from public transport operators in respect of the work that was done to ensure that people could go on public transport. But as the record would show, we did do a lot of publicity for the Moors bus service to take people to Danby Lodge, but unfortunately a lot of people wanted to attend by cars, and we can't dictate how people are going to arrive, and so we'll do our best to manage that in future.
I do believe there is plans afoot for the overflow car park, but you know, it is taking its time. I know the underground heating system was a major setback, but what is the proposal timescale for that then?
It's in the capital programme for this year, and we'll want to complete it by the end of this year. We were given some quite astronomical sums last year, which I didn't consider were at all viable, and we're value engineering that down so that we get it to a level where we can be assured that best value will take place, and that's virtually there. And I believe that a planning application, we've just got the BNG element to sort through, and then it can proceed, and that will then allow us to go out to tender. But hopefully by the end of March next year, that will all be completed, Chair.
Thank you. Anyway, go on, Jim.
Sorry, I got slightly waylaid from the point that I meant to finish on. And it was about engagement. I sort of touched on that on our audiences and our engagement strategy. But the question was, you know, are we tailoring our engagement to the intelligence that we have about what our different audiences want? And that was the point, you know, coming to Danby, some people might want to see the exhibition, some people might want to have a cup of coffee, some people might want to bring their kids to the playground, and they're all coming there for different reasons. And when they get there, they have the benefit of those interactions, but they probably wouldn't come there unless we engage with them on the reasons that tick their box. And so, you know, how is the intelligence of our engagement strategy developing in that respect? Because everybody in the world seems to be doing it these days.
Jim, thanks.
Yeah, so I mean, it's one of those things where you can't ever stand still, because people's expectations and then requirements, especially around how they want to spend their leisure time in particular, and we're very much positioned a lot of our engagement very much in people wanting a day out. So we always have to keep track of trends and where people are at, but the fundamentals never really change, which is a lot of people are here because, I mean, there's a phrase that often gets used, you know, what are the essentials? You know, a brew, a loo, a view, and then something to do. And it's that building block of understanding whether they're coming from segments which are much more active and they really want adventure, right the way through to people who really do just want a gentle stroll, through to people who want to engage with arts and culture. The information you get a lot of this, I mean, it's probably more a question for Katrina and her team in terms of the kind of data that we get through things like the STEAM data and the analysis that's done through the visitor surveys, and I'm not best placed to answer on that one. But we are constantly engaging with our audience and trying to understand, and certainly locally what we've done at Sutton Bank and at Danby Lodge is undertake survey work online with people, and that helps us to inform things locally, especially on things like activities and low-level events that we might put on.
Yeah, so I mean, my point was the messages that we're sending out, not coming in, you know, so it's having those people that we put messages out to that's likely to bring them to us. I'm not quite sure if that's what. And when they get there, they get the stuff. It's how do we get them there, and it's having the right messages for the right audiences that are going to bring them to us. I think that was my point when you were second put out.
I mean, the point is that we need to understand our customer. It's the fundamental tenet of retail strategy, is knowing what your customer wants. And we could always do better. We could always be more dynamic in the way that we do that. We do collect data, I think, on an annual basis through the Tourism Impact Survey that gives us a sense of why people are visiting the national park. What are they doing? Or what are they coming here when they do? When they do visit, and we do those surveys are undertaken at the two national park centres, so we get a little bit of a sense about why people are coming. Whether it's as on point and systematic as we'd like it to be, we can debate. We obviously get some cracking qualitative feedback from the conversations that are had by our visitor centre team, and that's one of the benefits of having people actually working in the setting. But it is a challenge, and certainly has been a challenge since COVID, where the kind of marketplace for outdoor attractions has changed quite significantly, and so we have to be on our toes, and we have to constantly think about how we innovate to ensure we're relevant to the demands and needs of not just people who've always visited the centres, but the future generations who may not have thought or care too much about the Northfield Moors at Place. So it's really important that we do continually innovate. One thing we have seen is how events like the ones we held at Danby and Sutton Bank over the bank holiday period, giving people, as you said, Colin, those kind of free events that are low cost, particularly in this day and age where people are looking for value, those kind of low cost attractions that give people a day out. They remain really important. It certainly has meant that over the last couple of years we've put some focus and energy behind events at our two national park centres as a means of bringing people in and driving repeat custom on the back of their experience.
Thank you. There was just one thing I was going to mention, was the 2-hour parking at the lower price. If that was for 3 hours, the families would stop longer and maybe go into the canteen, whatever, so that they were saying, we'll pay for parking for the 2 hours, but then we'll get out because we can't afford to stop for the full price of it. But whether that would encourage them to go for something to eat as well, or whether it would, I don't know, but it was just comments that I heard that, it might help. Any more comments? Yes, go on, George. Sorry, I've got it written down. Sorry, Heather, I'll be there. George, go on.
Yeah.
In a minute. Yes.
Sorry about that, Heather. Joe had mentioned Moore's Bus, and I think I need to declare that in the past I supported them through the locality budget application, through the locality budget process of North Yorkshire Council. So that's my declaration here. I thought I would just read a little email that they sent to all their subscribers, because I'm slightly concerned about the relationship between the Park Authority and Moore's Bus. They explained in the email, it's part of the monthly newsletter, I think, the regular newsletter that they sent, and they explained a few things at the start, but towards the end They said this Bank Holiday Monday, there are special events at Danby Lounge National Park Centre, including stilt walkers, folk singers, and stalls to mark the centre's 50th birthday, which is obviously positive. Then they said Moore's Bus were not invited, but it is important that we promote public transport and modal shift, so we will be there on the North York Moors Association stall. Do come and say hello. And then they asked the question, when will the National Park Authority take far-reaching action on the massive carbon footprint and pollution of tourism vehicle travel? So I thought I would just highlight this because it was sent by Moore's Bus to their subscribers from the email address friends of Moore's Bus, and it was widely circulated. I'm assuming it might have helped increase the number of people who turned up, but clearly there is something in terms of the relationship between the National Park Authority and Moore's Bus, and I think maybe it's beneficial for all parties that we have that better collaborative interaction with them.
Did you want to answer
that? Yeah, I haven't seen that email, George. That's disappointing to hear about that on an event that was a celebration. I think the point you make is very well made, but it works both ways.
Heather?
Yeah, actually, George, that's quite. I was going to go on to something about in relation to that, but more generally about we're an elderly population. There's a lot of people, like my friend included, who spends most of the time trying to find trips out on buses and where they're going to Harrogate. Or I said, you're spending money there, Joan. You can't afford shopping and stuff. I'm joking, but I have general discussions about this, and she's looking for places to go. And there are bus companies that do these days out. Maybe it's something, I don't know how we can sell it to them, but people want to come do something different, and there are opportunities maybe somewhere among these companies. But I did want to really finish on a positive note, really, to say that while we don't think we're reaching out, if we look at the figures at Sutton Bank and at Danby Lodge, they're an all-time high. So we are getting the message out there. Maybe they already know with that, I don't know, but we've said it, that the footfall has increased, and maybe they already know about us. I'm just trying to be more positive, really, but thank you.
Thank you. Go on,
just on the point about things like coach tours and the like, what we found was that the COVID period really devastated that basic economy, and they're only just recovering and working out where the market now is and the kinds of things that people want to do. And we are starting to see a small number of coach operators using both centres, but it's nowhere near what it was back in sort of the 2010s. So we're still trying to understand that market, but we will continue to try and engage with those operators, and obviously as well those that we get to come to the centres via our targeted transport fund as well. So hopefully, we will see a continued broadcast of that, of what we have to offer to those operators. But it definitely is a very changed market to what it used to be.
Thank you. Did we not have some conflict with the Moore's Bus, and they didn't want our assistance at 2 or 3 years ago?
We might be at risk of mixing our conversations there. Okay. So yeah.
Sorry. Okay. Right. Any more comments? Members, the recommendation is members note the scorecard, and thank you very much for your comments. If we move on to financial outturn update, Pete, take it. You'll take it.
Yes, Joe did a presentation for this one just to go through the highlights of the report.
Okay.
So that's, just make sure we're. So the 25-26 highlights. So this is obviously the summary table that's at the beginning of the report, which shows the budget position, the Q3 position, and the outturn position. So at Q3 we reported we'd have an 83k surplus on the bottom line, and our end position is 126k surplus. So that's 43k higher than we said at Q3, which is quite a small number. I would mention as well that 15.4 million is the total expenditure level. So again, that's a slight increase on last year, and again the most I think that we've spent in a single year. So again, a great achievement to deliver so much in terms of financial value, but that then equates, of course, to outcomes for the park as well in terms of sort of practical delivery. And the main driver for that surplus is around income. So we'll come to that on the next slides, but some of our income and overachievement of income in certain areas is one of the main drivers, and particularly that difference between the Q3 position and outturn. So on the income side, so it's about 100,000 higher than the Q3 forecast position at the end of the year. So some of the factors within that, actually car parking ended up a little lower than we had at the forecast position. So in Q4 that came down just a little bit, but it was just 6k short of the overall budget position, which is a really, really strong position to be in. You remember in the last 2-3 years, actually we've fallen slightly short of that. This year we took the same budget again, increased it for the tariff increase. So actually we have seen a higher footfall. And there is a table in there that kind of helps to show all the different car park performance in there. So strong performance again. We're seeing a theme of Sutton Bank, Newton de Roseby, Thornton the Dale, and it's worth pointing out that Sutton the Bank went over 200,000 in the year, which is quite some number. But also in context, Newton and de Roseby was about 176, I think, thousand. So not that far short of Sutton Bank for a site that doesn't have a visitor centre and doesn't have the facilities. So it just kind of expresses just how busy Newton and de Roseby is as a location at the moment. And Thornton the Dale, which actually Thornton the Dale's fallen short of budget for the last 2 to 3 years. This time it was over budget all year, and it's performed really well. So some real positives in there. I think in terms of others, actually we've seen a bit of a lower performance at Danby. So we've just been talking about visitor numbers being up. The overall income was down. I think we did have a little bit of an issue with the car park machine at times. They've been replaced now. So they had some reception issues. But I think the other thing is we've seen quite a big drive in permits. So we've seen quite a big increase in permit sales this year. And whilst we don't have the intel to point to whether it's Danby that's kind of driven some of those, the launch of the playground, I suspect, and particularly the big promotions around permits when that launched at the start of the year, is probably we're seeing quite a lot of people buying repeat permits for being able to do repeat visits to Danby, and probably seeing quite a lot of that uptake. So that's a really positive story, even though actually the car park number is down, permit sales is up, and I suspect there's a relationship there. But we don't quite have the intel, I think, to prove that. Planning fees. So at the beginning, right at the beginning of the year, Q1, we said planning fees would be down, and that's in part because at March last year, lots of people got in before the tariff increase on planning on the 1st of April. So we saw a big March and a very low April. That's carried its way all the way through, but we forecast that at Q3, and actually we've seen a slight recovery since then as well. So actually seen planning income improve a little over Q4, which is good news. The budget for that stays the same next year. It's always going to be one of our risk areas due to a little bit of unpredictability. So always one that needs monitoring. And what we have seen as well in retail sales is where the actual sales numbers have stayed relatively still, a little increase. The margins have increased considerably. So that sort of difference in the cost of sales and the sales. One of the really big focuses of the strategy was to get rid of any low margin products, low selling products, really focus on higher margin products and put some sets of rules in around actually we only stock products that will make certain margins. That's really come through now. We did a big element of getting rid of old stocks. We had a fresh start from the 1st of April. We're seeing some really, really good increase in margins from around about the 40% mark up to about 47%. So that's really positive. And cafe agreements, we've reported all year that the cafe agreements at Truffled have been really successful at both sites. And we've seen, because our rental agreements are based on a ground rent and then a big sort of commission element, concession element, that concession's been really, really good this year. That's really come through in terms of that share. So that's been positive too. And then finally, one of the really big drivers actually is income coming in for staff time that is otherwise core funded. We've seen really, really good elements of that this year going into projects. So roles that have been core funded in the budget, but we've found project funds to cover it. And over and above that, just since Q3, NPE is one. So Tom's done a lot of work for NPE this year in the absence of the executive director there. So we've had a much higher sum of money than we'd normally have for that support, which came through in Q4. That was an agreement in February. In farming and protected landscapes, where there's a small underspend on the project side, we can put that into corporate overhead cover. That's a decision that's taken right at the end of the year when we have a final position. So that again is higher, and that's similar to last year. And then biodiversity net gain, we did put a marker down in that for Q3 for the second element. That was a bit higher than we actually thought it would be, so it's a little bit more there. And those three actually, which weren't in Q3, are a large part of the driver for the extra surplus that we've got up to the 126 number. And then finally, investment income. So that doesn't fall down to the bottom line. We capped that this year at 120,000. That number came through 244k higher than that. So that will go to reserves, and there's a recommendation in the paper that 244,000 goes to property reserve. So a little bit on expenditure. There's kind of less highlights in expenditure in truth. We've got a lot of these that came through at Q3 anyway. Utility savings actually even higher than we forecast. So at Q3 we put quite a big saving in for utilities. That was even higher again. That's two elements of that. One is a bit of price, but I think we're really starting to see things like the solar power and everything else that we're putting in and the real benefits of that. Recruitment, legal and training costs were higher than budget, so we've had a bit more recruitment than we expected this year, including a couple of quite challenging roles, such as the minerals planner, where you have to kind of really target specific publications, etc. And then legal costs have been a little bit higher, and training as well. We've had quite a bit of catch-up training on the leadership development, so actually they've gone a little over budget. And then finally, we've mentioned before, insurance and audit costs were a little bit higher, and they were forecast at Q3. Vacancy factor. So most years I'm sat here saying we're going to miss vacancy factor. Actually, we've overachieved vacancy factor this year. So that was in at 55,000. That's come through at about probably about 80 or 90,000. I think most of that through planning. So we've had some quite significant vacancies in that period where our senior planner left, and some other vacancies too. So that's actually achieved this year. And then finally, lower toilet spend. It's one of the ones that's a little bit higher. It's one of the ones year on year we've seen, so it's a little bit of a review to do there about whether or not there's a saving to take. But as I said, not really any that exciting expenditure headlines, which is good. Actually, what you want to get to at the end of the year is not to have that many exciting expenditure underspends or overspends. So it's actually quite positive. It means we're largely spending to budget, that we've got good budgetary control, and I think that's a positive side. And then finally, local plan. So we've managed to get some funding for local plan this time. So we've got 108,000 that's come through to support the local plan process as external funding. That means normally with local plan, where we've got an underspend, we'd carry that forward. We've not had to carry that forward now. We can let that go. So that's gone as part of the surplus as well. And just in terms of carry forwards, normally we have 3 or 4 proposals for carry forwards that aren't any this year for approval. Hence, there's no recommendation for that. Section 106 agreements. So Woodsmith and Bulby. I'll bring all of that up. So again, we've spent the vast majority of the funding. We've spent more than the in-year allocation on both of these by a small amount. Little bits of ups and downs in there. So on the Woodsmith agreement, we did flag at Q3 that core policy D would underspend, and it has done, but not by as much as we had at Q3, actually, a bit less than that. But we have seen an overspend of landscape and ecology that we kind of expected. We had quite a bit of carry forward of projects last year. They've been delivered on top of the in-year allocation. So there's small underspends on monitoring and archaeology, nothing of concern, and they're all earmarked for future spend. And there's no risk of any payback at the moment in any of those pots. The Bulby agreement, again, we've overspent slightly there as well in terms of that in-year allocation, and most of that is around those brought forward projects again in landscape and ecology. Last year in Bulby, we were getting going with Bulby. We had a little bit of those projects to bring forward. Offset a little bit by an underspend on peat, but that is earmarked for wildlife recovery and the High Farndale work. So that underspend on peatland this year in Bulby is very much earmarked for those big future projects that we're delivering. External funding projects. So we have the 2.5 million target. We've already talked in the external funding report about that being achieved. And then FIPL, we've already mentioned previously just about that small underspending projects that get completed that we can reallocate to the corporate overhead, which is great. We do have 4 projects that have some levels of underspend. Lincoln Convention, Raiding the Bank, and Peatland, I think we flagged at Q3. Reconnect, we didn't flag within the Q3 report, but all of those are relatively small underspends. They're covered in the report, so there's no risk to delivery in any of those. And as I've mentioned before, our overall delivery at 15.4 million, just some very small underspends that are just slight phasing changes in delivery of projects. So nothing really major there, and all still in line to deliver. So the only other element that isn't in the report, normally it would be, is the reserves table. Part of the challenge of closing down the accounts is an enormous amount of work to do for Sandra and Claire in terms of closing down accruals and various other things at the end of the year. It just put quite a bit of pressure on to the point where the reserves position we only got just after the publication deadline. So I've brought it in the presentation here. Overall position is broadly similar year on year. You can see we've come down in section 106 a little bit, which is just that reflection of certain elements of that. And we're using some of those funds now, like you can see some of the property reserve elements. The contribution to reserves there is a reflection of the recommendation in the report, so it's subject to that. So the 370,000 contribution to that property reserve is subject to the recommendation today. So obviously if that's not approved by members, then that won't be going to that reserve and will come back out. The Revitalised match funding now is being funded on that sort of Ride Legacy element. So you can see that starting to come down, and then we've delivered a lot of car park signage this year, so that's also starting to come down as well. And then the other one is the signage 100,000. That's the big main routes signage that's matched by section 106. We start to see some progress on that now. So we're finally, after 7 or 8 years of me being here, seeing that number at 100,000, starting to see that start coming down now. I think what we do need to do is a number of pots in here that have still got little bits left in it. Things like signage we've broadly finished now. I think there is a tidy up to do in that, particularly that second section. I think we've got certain pots there with small amounts left in that probably just need to be reallocated. So my recommendation is we come back and do a review like we have done before of all of those reserve pots and bring to the FRASC in September a proposal of what to do with those reserves that probably need to be closed down now. And I think the only other one actually mentioning, we've now put bequests and legacies on here as well at the bottom. So we have had 2 or 3 will legacies and things like that. I think it's just worth monitoring those. So they're not officially in our reserves position, so they're underneath slightly separately. But I think it's worth monitoring those. And we've been able to put some of that into the new observatory building at Danby. And we do try to look for and find really good legacy bequest deliveries, if you like the observatory building at Danby, to be able to put that into, rather than sort of using it on smaller scale things with a really lasting legacy as well. We want to try and put that funding. So then just the 2 recommendations. So I've noted the content of the report as usual, but then there is the allocation of the surplus and the interest receivable additional to the property reserve to reduce borrowing requirements on the new headquarters is the recommendation in the report.
Thanks, Pete. Any comments? Can we go straight to? Not going straight through.
So just this isn't about allocating the extra money that we found from DEFRA that was announced at the budget, is it?
No. So just to confirm, in terms of the additional money from DEFRA, that will come in June NPA. This is about 2 elements. You've got 126,000 surplus on the bottom line for the 25-26 financial year, and then the additional money that's coming from interest receivable over and above the cap that we put. So it's just those 2 elements.
Yes, that was the investment windfall.
Yes, the 1.7 million funding from DEFRA is going to come to June NPA as proposal.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, Pete. Quick question on the car parks general, because it has come actual lower than budget. I think 49 grand versus 64. I understand that the permits are part of the general line, but the permits have come up as higher than expected because of what we talked about earlier. So then there must have been something else that has come back significantly lower within the general. What is it?
So there's 2 elements in there. One is concessions. So there was a big drive to try and get more money from concessions and concession stands on our car parks, and that hasn't really come off in terms of the work that we've done. So that will be adjusted next year. I think the other one was that Lucas, there was an uplift in some of the car parking that Lucas did a bit of a review and felt like his car parks were going to perform to X, and there was a certain amount that he thought was a bit more of a challenge that he's put into there. There's a car parks general that he thinks is the additional challenge. Actually, all the car parks have achieved. So there's something there which actually that in reality probably ought to be distributed across. I think that was 36,000 underspend there. So I think there's 36,000 relating to that, which probably ought to go across the other car parks. There's the concessions, which are about 10 to 15 lower. and then there's the permits which are up. So there's 3 movements within that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense now.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, just about the local plan, obviously. It's nice to know that the government's given us some money. I'm not very clear whether that's just for this year, whether it's for the full 3 years, what the overall implication is for...
It's the full duration of the plan for 3 years.
Sorry, sir.
And Chris is putting 3 fingers up at me. Hopefully not 2, 3, I think. So yeah, it's for the full duration of the local plan, 3 years, so it cover the whole period. And should cover all of our costs, I think, but depending as we go through.
Will it have implications for staff cost? You know, are there some staff costs going from core to?
Certainly will be able to. Yeah. So the local plan has always come all out of core funding. So it's all been core funded before. So both the staff time that goes into that, but then also kind of the various governance and review stages that need to be done. All of that hopefully will fit into this budget of 108,000, which will cover both our staff time. So yes, we will see a benefit of switching core to this fund next year in the budget.
And just found is it dependent on us producing it on time?
Absolutely is, yes. And it's also dependent, I believe.
I thought the answer was yes. I just thought
it
that
is.
all members know that.
And I believe it's dependent on us beginning it before the end of June, which is why there's a June NPA report to kickstart the local plan.
Precisely. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Just on the money that we're looking forward to working out our next projects and to spend on, I think was it 1.75 DEFRA, did you say?
There's DEFRA 1.7 million of our.
Sorry, 1.7, sorry. And that is just for 1 year, is it?
No, it is for 1 year. So we have to spend all of that 1.7 million in the 26-27 year. What we can do, however, is if we can't spend all of that money in the 26-27 year, we can effectively displace our earned income. So we can use the grant to fund things our earned income would fund, and then have a surplus at the end of the year of earned income, which would go into our balance sheet, and we can use that in future years. So there's a couple of methodologies. So the grant is for 1 year, 26-27, but if we spend it on the things we would otherwise spend our earned income on, we've got the ability to displace that earned income and use it in future years.
Okay, so I was just sort of thinking about this. I sort of written funny things to myself on it. So if this is the case that we at the moment only know about 1 year, is it not perhaps, and I was a bit disappointed, I'd hoped that this meeting was going to actually look at what potentially we were going to and scrutinise before we went to NPA what potentially we were going to spend the money on. But as we're not and it's going directly to NPA, should we not at this stage perhaps defer making the decision on the property and that sort of thing and look at it as a whole? Because if there's things that we really think are important but may need to run over to a future year, this money here we can run over to where we like or what we do, I'm presuming.
Yeah, I mean, earned income, if we have a surplus of earned income, we have the flexibility to use that as we wish.
So I was feeling I'm looking at 2 different things, whereas actually it's like a whole, and for the strategy going forward for the authority, would we not be better to look at it as a whole rather than as in 2 pots, and maybe just because we've been given, and as Malcolm very correctly said to me at a meeting before, remember Jane, it's politics. And therefore you have to know that when they say it's 1 year and you have to do it. And so I'm saying, well, if it is politics and we've been given a year, can we not use some of our other stuff to look at things in a slightly longer term if there's a tail that's needed and things?
We could, and members are free to reject the recommendation from officers and consider it NPA. I'll take it on the chin that we're not having a discussion about the additional RDL, but we need more time as a group of directors to ensure that we've got the full suite of opportunities, and we're confident they're within the criteria for which DEFRA has awarded that additional funding, which relate to the financial resilience of the authority and the ability to deliver national projects, particularly those related to 30 by 30. So we need a little bit more time just to kind of work that out. Hence why I'm afraid it's not coming to members today for a discussion. It will be going to.
So actually, that leads exactly that. Some of this money, where if it doesn't meet exactly those criterias, but it's areas that you as officers are keen that we still considered, perhaps then this should have been included. This makes it important to include this as an overall.
Possibly, but I mean, people will clarify this. But I think even though members haven't made it a firm policy, in the last couple of years where we've had a surplus, we have sought to allocate that to the property reserve with a view to defraying borrowing costs. And I think there is something there about the certainty and predictability of all of that, knowing that as things stand, even with the use of the generous capital allocation from DEFRA this year, there's still a risk of borrowing. So I think our preference probably as officers would be to allocate, but again, members are free to make a different decision if you would prefer to kind of look at this in the round.
Jim?
I was just coming back briefly on that point, and I was sort of thinking the same thing. I thought, is there something that we really desperately need a windfall for, which isn't the property reserve? But then I also thought that actually, if it really came to it, we could unallocate it to the property reserve, and so I'm probably happy with the recommendation as it is.
I mean, I think in terms of writing the outturn report, we do kind of need to write a proposal in it. So we do get other funding from other locations. Yes, they interact with each other to some extent where you get windfalls of different kinds. But we do need to at least put some proposal, because it's very much related to the outturn. The 1.7 is very much related to 26, 27. So they're two different things in that sense, but I get that they're interrelated. I think the option for members can be that we can just allocate it currently to reserves and unallocated reserves. And we could pick that up either in June, or we could pick it up at the next FRASC when we review reserves anyway. So there's a couple of options there if members wanted to not allocate it to property, but for the moment just allocate it as unallocated. But I think we would then want to allocate it in future. I'm never keen to have unallocated reserves, because I just don't think perception-wise it looks like we may not have things to spend our reserves on. We absolutely do. So I think we could certainly for now do it as an allocated, subject to a future decision if members wanted to do that rather than allocate it specifically. But my suggestion would be we then make a call on that either at June NPA when we do look at the 1.7 million, or at the next FRASC when we review reserves anyway. And I'm happy with as members want to decide.
I was just going to verify, Pete, what Jim had suggested, which I also assume is that if we allocate it to the property, we could reallocate that money at some point in future, or is it more locked in than that?
Well, if it allocates to property, then it would probably go on the HQ, which obviously will progress over the next year. So there is certainly a finite time to unallocate. I think my preference would be, if members are uncertain, that at the moment we put it into reserves as an unallocated line and say we need to allocate that either in June or September, rather than necessarily put it to something if members aren't sure and unallocate later. So.
Yeah. I should know this, Pete, really. If it goes into reserves, will it be invested? We'll do a short-term investment.
Whilst it's unspent, yes. So whilst it's unspent, it will sit as cash in our accounts and therefore be subject to the investment interest next year. But obviously then when we spend it, it's spent.
Yeah, obviously. Okay, thank you. Well,
there's a correlation between reserves and cash.
Well, that's right. I mean, it'd be short-term investment, but it's better than... Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to read the room here for the chair's benefit in terms of the recommendation. I'm getting a sense that members are we could consider the recommendation as read, but there might well be some degree of dissent. If we remove the word, if we substitute the word property for general reserve, I'm assuming that members would be happy to approve that recommendation. So I think, Chair, when we take the recommendation, we're substituting the word property reserve for general reserve.
Yeah.
Okay. Have we any more comments at the moment? Right, sorry. If we can go to the recommendation, then that members approve the allocation of 126k and 244 receivable at 4.2 to the general reserve to reduce borrowing requirement on the new headquarters.
Well, yeah,
maybe
just general reserve.
Maybe don't want that bit up.
Yeah.
But all in favour of that?
Great.
Thank you. Right, going forward, we'll have a property update.
Anybody want a comfort break? Just. I saw Jim stealing off, and I do. So.
We're nearly at the end, but yeah. I think if the speaker requires a comfort break, it's probably appropriate to do so, Chair.
Right, we'll have a 5-minute comfort break. That's okay. We'll recommence. One, if we can, ladies, gentlemen, sorry, if we can.
Your boy did get an elbow in the ribs there.
Yeah, well, you know, I can be sorted out, like, you know. Moving forward, we'll have Pete to give us a property update.
Thanks, Chair. As much as anything, I've now got a power cable, so I've got a laptop, so that's also the main reason for having a break as well. So we committed to bringing, we bring property updates anyway quite regularly to this committee, but we did commit with the new HQ that we bring one every single quarter now, right through to the completion of the project and just beyond. To keep updating about the new headquarters, which it will primarily be, but also the depot this time as well, which is reaching the end of its development schedule. Not too many finances in here at the moment because not much has changed, but obviously in future ones will be very much about financial progression as it gets underway. At the moment, of course, the project on the headquarters isn't quite underway yet in terms of on the ground. So I'll quickly go through the two main areas. So the new depot, which I think quite a few of you went to see last week, that's now reaching conclusion. On the same day, I think, as you went, the utility companies turned up and connected our electricity as well successfully. So that's really good news because we had some doubt as to whether they'd be able to successfully connect us on that day. And that's been one of the big things we've been waiting for alongside Yorkshire Water connecting the water supply as well. So the depot is now up and ready. The hard standing by the side has been done. And now it's about moving in and starting to line the pedestrian walkways and some of those very, very final elements. So that's really good news. And over the next month or two, we should be moved into the new depot and out of Sawmill. On the new headquarters, so we've been progressing that with planning at North Yorkshire Council. We're still waiting for one or two elements of that as covered in the report. And we have now signed the contract as well. So in the report it says we're going to sign the contract because this was published before. We've now signed that contract with the company to deliver on site, and we expect that to commence from the 1st of June. There is a conclusion date in April 27, and then we'll probably have a bit of lead in time to moving people across. So probably looking at sort of summer, early summer, autumn next year in terms of a conclusion date at the moment. There is one bit of financial information in there, which is before we signed the contract. They had a bit of a review of fuel costs. So industry-wide at the moment, there's quite a big review of fuel costs happening as a consequence of fuel prices going up considerably. And obviously quite a lot of it is about transporting materials to site, etc. And indeed the fuel costs that things like steel providers are also facing as well. So there is a bit of an uplift in cost before we signed the contract at 40,867. Which we're obviously reporting as we said we would with any kind of. And at this stage, we will look at ways of mitigating that out. But right at the beginning of the project, at the moment, that is a contingency call, but we will be looking to mitigate that out as the project goes if we can. It's worth saying as well in terms of any tender impacts and things of that sort that that amount wouldn't have changed any of the tenders or anything of that sort, so there'd be no need to make any implications around that. It's also happening right across the industry, so our cost consultants and project managers, Peak Construction, inform us that actually for most of their clients now, these additional fuel costs prior to sign up with that gap of 12 months between tender and signing of the contract, that's happening with quite a few now. And the amount doesn't seem unreasonable given what we've seen with fuel costs happening in the industry. Another element is that we've set up a project team now. So there's a project team to see the whole headquarters project through, so that's in 2.6. And that's been built with the various experts that we have in site, with Mark Young providing project management ethos right across it as one of the biggest projects we'll deliver this year, but also with directorate representatives as well. So we make sure we have that full communication to and from directorates, and a real sort of people focus with Claire Roberts in there as well to make sure we get that real people change aspect of the project, which to be successful, we really have to make sure we take the people with us and do it in a smooth, and it's a big change curve for staff. So we need to make sure we respect that as part of delivery. I think they are the main aspects. I think I have put a little bit about other property updates, but there's nothing too major in there. I refer to the fire safety review, but we'll refer to that in health and safety in much more detail, so not necessarily to be covered here. We are bringing in a desk booking system for the old vicarage is the only other thing worth mentioning. We will have a hot desk culture when we get to the new HQ. We're bringing that into here, particularly with Sawmill Lane staff moving up in the next month or two. just to make sure we manage capacity in a good and efficient way, and people have absolute assurance they have a desk when they come to the office. So that will be launching in the next month.
Thanks, Pete. Heather?
Yeah, just as an ex-chair of one of the Steel Stockholders Association, I do get a few reports, and it's not good news really. The National Association are lobbying the government because the EU are going to put tariffs on steel imports, and it's going to go up dramatically. So it's not good news for you, Pete, really. But I mean, it's going to get worse, really. And the prices have gone up. We only produce so much of steel. I mean, obviously it's been mostly beams, but again, it does reflect. So yeah, you'll have to keep an eye. I mean, obviously, this is from the contractors, but as I say, the tariffs they're going to put on is a bit like Trump, really, what they're going to do with Britain. So it's not great news, but. So
Yeah,
I'm sorry, you're going to expect a bit more increase if they don't get this right.
Now we signed the contract, the prices are fixed. This was their way of just beforehand catering for that additional rise.
Yeah, it's going to get worse, I think.
But we're fixed into a contract now. So.
The tariffs are ridiculous. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
It's just brief because there isn't anything you can do about it. But you mentioned the hot desking, and obviously it's a necessary thing at the moment with staff moving into this building. But in terms of going forward into a new building, I'll just put it on the table again that hot desking is one of those diabolical plagues of the modern workplace because it creates a sense, I think, of detachment for people because they don't have a place. And I just think it's you know, sometimes necessary, but it's quite a negative psychological factor in, you know, people being committed to their work. So I've mentioned it before, but I just take the opportunity to throw that in there again.
Thank you. Any more comments going forward? Just one, Pete, this 40,000 extra, will they give us it back if prices come down in a rush?
No, we're fixed into the contract. So at the point at which we signed the contract, 12 months has passed since they tendered. Things have very much changed in that fuel market. They've given us a one-off rise before signing the contract. The contract is now fixed.
Right, okay. Right, moving on. The recommendation is that members note the contents of the report. Thank you, Pete. If we move on to the proposed new complaints policy and procedure, I'll hand the floor over to you, Richard.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, this report then is seeking your approval of a new complaints policy and procedure within that. And I'll start by just thanking Keith Wilkinson, our independent person, for significant input over the last, and patience with me actually. 2 years ago he raised this with me. So just reading through my report, I'll just touch on some important points. So paragraph 2, I'll just, the context, the relevant context. Our existing complaints procedure is at Appendix 1. And then in February 2024, the Local Government and Social Care Ombudsman produced a new complaint handling code. It was their complaint handling code. And it strictly doesn't bind national park authorities. But the Ombudsman has made it clear that it considers the code to be good practice for all organisations to adopt. In view of that, officers feel like now is the time to adopt those aspects of that code that are relevant to the range of services we deliver. So the proposed new complaints the proposed new complaints policy is in Appendix 2 of this report. Just a few specific changes. Again, I'll rattle through it quite quickly. I'm sure you've all read this, and I know you've probably worked out whether you're happy with it or not. So I'll just touch on Section 1 specifically refers to diversity. Obviously, it's something we have to be explicit about these days. Sections 2, 3 and 4, this is a key point. They distinguish now service, request and complaint. So this was a key point. Our existing complaints report talks about an informal stage, a first stage, which I've always been happy with, having a first informal stage. It meant we could filter out matters that weren't really that important or were just misunderstandings. The Ombudsman is quite specific. They don't like an informal stage. They want everything that we get
to either be classified as a service request or a complaint and dealt with accordingly. So that they've made some clarification. They want clarification there. Sections 5 and 6 of the new complaint code, this complaints policy, this allows for appropriate flexibility as to which officers deal with the complaint, just for better use of officer time, because obviously complaints can use up a lot of hours. Section 8 of the policy, this allows for reasonable extensions of time. Section 9 includes correct references to special cases that fall out of the complaints procedure. So the Ombudsman accepted that by giving these clearer definitions, it does have to allow for special cases, matters that we won't be dealing with through our complaints policy. And then Section 10 talks about, refers to reasonable adjustments. Again, we deal with reasonable adjustments anyway, but it's right that we're explicit about that. Section 11 retains what we've already got in our existing policy, but reference to unreasonable complaint behaviour. We do regularly get vociferous complaints that stray beyond reasonable complaints, and we do need to be able to deal with those accordingly. And then Section 14 includes sensible recognition of the need for time limits. Again, we have had 1 or 2 complaints where they were 2 or 3 years after the event, and we just couldn't sensibly investigate. Staff had left, and we couldn't get to the bottom of them adequately. So we do now have time limits. I'll just jump to paragraph 4.3 of my report, and again, it's just the overview here. So this new policy is an attempt to make the complaints procedure more accessible and more encouraging of complaints and other feedback. And that's on the basis that it's a slight change in attitude towards that. The hope is that will encourage improvements. If there are any issues that need improving, this should encourage and deliver those improvements. And this is the key part of the approach recommended by the Ombudsman, to be more, for all authorities to be more embracing of complaints. We do recognise that the managing of these complaints will require more staff time, and we will monitor the amount of time spent by staff dealing with these complaints. So, Chair, just jumping to then Section 6 of the report, the recommendation. So we're asking that members approve the proposed new complaints policy and procedure set out in Appendix 2 for it to come into effect on the 1st of June 2026. And Chair, just Keith Wilkinson has again put a lot of time and effort into this, so I would welcome any comments, Chair, through you, if he's got any.
Thank you, Richard. Any comments? And you, Keith, please.
Yeah, I'll just be very brief, Chair, really just to endorse the comments that Richard has already made. Certainly recommend the new draft policy to members for approval. I think if I can just, in my role as independent person, just maybe be a critical friend to the authority for a moment. I think your existing complaints policy is a little forbidding, and I think the approach recommended by the Ombudsman's new code, it's a little bit counterintuitive to say, let's encourage complaints, you know, when we think we perform well as an authority. But the message from the Ombudsman very much is that sometimes a low level of complaints can be indicative of a slightly closed and non-encouraging complaints policy, and a good modern organisation should encourage complaints. It's a great way of actually improving and make sure the service is as good as it can be. So I'd recommend it on that basis, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. Well, the recommendation from Keith's pretty good, but Jim?
I welcome this, Chair. I think it's good, but I'm just in the back of my mind, I'm wondering, you know, somebody comes into the office and says, I don't like the way you refused my planning application. Is that a service request or is it a complaint? I think there's still going to be a bit of some sort of a process to decide which those are.
Yes, a very good point. This is something the Ombudsman, I've challenged the Ombudsman gently about that. The informal stage that we have at the moment allows us to deal with that. Equally, it would be defined probably as a service request, so it's now clearly categorised. But we're always going to have this the range of complaints, from genuine and sincere complaints to vexatious complaints or trivial complaints. So
I would be sincerely vexed and genuine, Chairman, in being disappointed about that. But I just wondered, who decides if it's a service request or a complaint?
We will decide. We will decide where we would define it, and a lot of matters will be a combination of a service request and a complaint. But we will have to decide that. And again, it means we may well deal with the matter as a service request, and then the external party may decide actually no, this is now a complaint. But it is we will be the decision maker at that first stage as to what we define it as.
Let's see how it goes. I welcome it.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we, as officers, we have to welcome and embrace this in the interests of adopting best practice. So we support this. I think the only thing I'd observe is that there's quite a lot of conversation that takes place between officers and potential complainants that avoids complaints getting there in the first place. I think that goes unseen in our complaints process. And Chris was highlighting an example recently of one where he dealt with a situation informally with an applicant or an agent. When complaints do enter into the formal tunnel, though, I cannot understate the amount of time and sometimes complexity that they absorb, and therefore members just need to be cognizant that if we do invite more formal complaints down the line, you probably will see more officer time taken up in dealing with them.
Yeah, my only question is, in looking at the new procedures laid out, it still, heavily references this informal stage. Does that language need to be changed at all?
Is this the service request, paragraph 3, Christine?
Sorry, if I can come in, I think Chairman Christine, you may be looking at Appendix 1, which is the existing complaints policy. Appendix 2 is the existing complaints procedure. Appendix 2 is the new complaints policy.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Any more comments? If we can take the recommendation, members approve the proposed new complaints policy and procedure set out in Appendix 2 for it to come into effect on the 1st of June 2026. No, all in favour of that? Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much, Keith, for your input as well. Thank you. We'll get there eventually. Item 15, health and safety update.
Yes.
You again, Pete.
Thanks, Chair. So, health and safety update, which is the regular update that we bring. I guess the things I'll just draw. Normally, what I do is I review the ones that have come in the quarter and just draw out a couple that I think probably merit management's attention. So, one of those was around an accident that happened in the field where you have crown holes, and it kind of emphasised that we have need to recognise where there are crown holes in the terrain where people are working. In this instance, it was the woodland team. So, for instance, the archaeology team are very well aware of crown holes. They manage to deal with them a lot and they understand them a lot. Our woodland team don't so much. So it kind of emphasised to us a need to be a little bit more careful when we're working on particularly areas where we know there are crown holes. Quite often we have the archaeological record where we can see them on the maps where they exist. And it just needs a little bit more vigour when we're working on those particular sites because they come with extra hazards, especially if you're planting trees where you can imagine you're covering quite a lot of the site. In this instance, there was some degree of, so it was prodding the ground and things like that to try and make sure, but there was one that was hidden, and the foot went through that. There was no injury to it, but it's obviously it does highlight a potential issue with anybody working on that particular terrain. Miles, our archaeologist, is very familiar with working on that kind of terrain and did a lot of assistance with the woodland team about how to manage those kind of sites. But it has emphasised that actually anybody in the park could, in theory, be working across those sites. We just need to be more aware of them. And the other one was just around a member of the public at Sutton Bank who limited mobility, wanted to take a seat as they were walking round, took a tumble off the seat. Again, no injury, but it emphasise that actually that seating is not necessarily that friendly for people with limited mobility, with it having no back or sides, more just those sort of bench seats. So something just to think about in terms of people needing somewhere of comfort. And obviously the major point of the report is around the fire safety report for the old vicarage. So it's every 5 years we have to undertake a fire safety report on all of our property. So we've undertaken one at the old vicarage and one at Sutton Bank and Danby as well. Sutton Bank and Danby are both quite recent reports, so we're still looking at those at the moment. But the old vicarage was the first one to come through. I've laid out the recommendations that have come from that. There were 2 or 3 that were particularly high profile. So use of the second floor was the first one. So in the past when we've had these reviews, actually they've deemed that as long as we've got less than 6 people up there, then we can still operate. But actually, when I've reviewed it with the health and safety person this time, with a fresh pair of eyes, different health and safety person, I agree that I don't think the second escape down the set of ladders through 4 cupboards, down a hatch and down the ladder into planning corridor is a particular. It's not really it's an exit, but it's not really an appropriate one, and it does just drop you onto another sort of exit route actually. So it's not particularly practical anyway, because if you open that ladder up, you'd be arguably blocking the exit route on the planning corridor. So what we've done immediately on the first day after this came out is take the second floor out of action. So those who are working up there are now working on the ground on the first floor. Second storage is just for storage only now. So we just archive up there. And we have a buddy system and a whiteboard system for anybody who's going up to that floor. We were also the electronics on the floor outside the Chief Executive Office on the first floor. So they raised an issue about so many electronics on there, particularly the photocopiers, etc. So again, on the first day, we moved those out into the chapel meeting room. So they're now off that corridor. We've closed the kitchens on the top floor and the first floor as well for extra protection for those proposed routes. And we've also cleared any kind of flammable things under the stairs. So we had quite a lot of HER record files underneath the lobby stairs. We've cleared those out now from underneath. So there's a few actions that were ones that we had to immediately take. There's a number of others that we'll need to think about over the next few months. So that's going to be things such as we've already got fire warden training happening later this week. So we're going to train up 18 people in this office. Because we work hybrid, we need to work up a good number to make sure we always have a fire warden on site on a rota. So that's happening this week. And I think since COVID, we've not had as rigorous a fire warden or testing regime as we should have done. So we're building that back up again into what we ought to have. The other element as well is just around written record, and I think that's probably a learning for us in a few different areas, not just the fire safety. There are areas where we are doing testing, but our records are either in handwriting, often down to a particular individual, so a caretaker of a site will carry out those tests. All of them have a very different way of recording it, and all down to individuals as opposed to a system. So I think we need to find a more systematic approach to recording results and keeping results. And I think that's actually probably quite a broad-based assessment across a number of areas, not just this. We need to look at how we actually keep and monitor our sort of histories of testing, so that we have those to hand. And that quite often is not that the testing's not being done, but it's about if anything was to happen in the future, you need that record as proof of what you've been doing. And if we don't have that in a really comprehensive and legible and appropriate way, that does put us at risk as an organisation. So there's a number of learnings that have come out of it. They've been really useful. We need a certain amount of pragmatism because we're not in this building for much longer. So we need to be a little bit pragmatic about some of the recommendations, and they are all recommendations, but some of them are absolutely things that we should be doing. Others need a little bit of careful assessment. So there's more work to do over the next 3-4 months. We've got Sutton Bank and Danby to come. I believe Sutton Bank has got a very clean bill of health, but I'm still to read all the aspects of that. Danby will be reviewing later this week. So open up to members for any questions on that.
Go on, Heather.
Yeah. Thanks, that Pete. It's a difficult job. Obviously, you know, with moving out here and how much money, but as long as we are covered by the insurance for any accidents that we fulfil that, well, we should keep the cost out the bare minimum. Thank you for this building. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Pete. That all makes sense, and I'm glad to hear about the unfortunate that it existed, but glad that you've addressed the precarious fire exit arrangements, because that does sound quite serious. At the same time, it sounds like with this and the hot desking that we touched on, that there may be quite a lot of things for staff to be taking on board, and this probably outside of your remit and more to Tom really is, you know, how is the staff attitude? What's the feeling of things these days amongst folks? A bit of hope on the long distant horizon, but a lot of turmoil in the short term.
Yeah, I mean, one thing, well, I'll say quickly, actually, when we got the report on Friday afternoon at about 6 o'clock. And over the weekend, I think Tom and I stewed on it over the weekend. Firstly, on Monday, we went straight into action on the things that I've mentioned already, and staff were absolutely brilliant. So in terms of this specific element, they were fantastic. They were straight on deck straight away. There was 5 or 6 who were moving files straight away that morning. Simon Baum was reconnecting photocopiers by about 12 o'clock. The attitude of staff that day was absolutely fantastic. We've done a lot of work with staff in terms of our staff meetings. So all of this has been communicated to staff, including about keeping paper, keeping, you know, archive materials, all of that kind of thing, and staff have been great about that. I think in terms of staff, I think the mood is great. I think they've taken this really well. I think some people were quite wedded to the second floor, so that's been a little bit of a culture change. But you know, we've managed that. Staff have been really good about changing in the office as well, because we've had to change the meeting spaces. So, for example, we've lost a meeting room in the chapel. So Chris and Joel are coming out of their office into the main office. You know, they've been brilliant about that and adapting those changes. We've moved conservation out of what was the old Rye office and moved Howardian Hills into there so they can work together. And again, teams just moved really smoothly, moved their equipment. It's been really, really fantastic attitude. I think people are looking, and in terms of referencing to the new office and the sort of hot desk working, again, I think people are comfortable with that as well. There will definitely be a change, but we've got ways of working group that's going to spin off the property group to look at how we do hot desking. So we've made it very clear to staff, we're probably not going to get it right from the beginning. We need to find ways in which people can still come in and work together. So book 2 desks together, for example, if you want to work with somebody that particular day. And maybe if we want to bring teams in together, then we need to do that in a coordinated way so that all of planning can come in one day. We have that in a coordinated fashion. So there's still something to work on that. But I think one of the real benefits of bringing it in now is that we can work on that and get it right here for a real smooth transition to the new HQ. And I think there's a lot of enthusiasm for the new HQ as well. The things that we can provide in there that we can't here. And in some ways, actually, the fire report on the second floor and these old kind of style buildings, the fact that a lot of our stairways are wooden and a bit too narrow for what you would normally have, all of that kind of points at the fact that these buildings are not really practical for offices. And I think quite a lot of staff recognise that. But one thing I would just mention is that we brought the head of people into that property group on property specifically to manage the people changes, because we do recognise that for some people it will be quite a big change. So there's a real big focus in that group, as much about putting the building up as making sure we transition the staff as well. But we are going to have less seats, and what we don't want to have is people coming in and not having a seat to sit, or people want to know where they're going to come in to sit. So actually having that hot desking where you can't allocate someone a specific seat when you've only got 60 seats to 120 staff. So actually for people to be able to book it in a way that they know who they're sitting with, where they're sitting, I think does bring that comfort actually, rather than a hot desking and a complete randomisation of come and see what you've got.
Thanks, Pete. Paul Clive.
It was just 5.2, and you've got all the ones to do with fire regulation. Then it's got consider security at front entrance of the building. That's not a fire issue, but what is the issue? What are you going to do?
So our health and safety officer picked up some other things as she went round. So this was officially a fire safety review, but hadn't actually very helpfully, she did actually look at a couple of other things as she went round as well. So you'll notice asbestos is mentioned, as is sort of a Legionnaire's checks on the water supply and things like that. So she looked at some other aspects of building as she went round. And one of those was about security of the front door. As you know, at the moment, we don't have a swipe system on the front door or to go upstairs. We do have reception, so that reduces that risk in any case, but her view was more about what security is there for receptionists. Where have they got to go? Can they go somewhere where they can close a door behind them? It was more that aspect of it. There's things we need to consider, like making sure that receptionists are never there on their own on that floor. There's always somebody in the office behind them. And some of this is about saying, actually, that's the recommendation to the nth degree, if you like. Actually, is there a reasoned solution where we do a bit more? And we referenced insurance earlier, and actually a lot of this is not much insurance, it's more our responsibility to our staff. And it's actually making sure we look at each of those and go, right, what is the right thing to do for us in this building? And I think that's eventually, if anything were to happen, like a fire, that's what will be looked at. Have you got this report and all these recommendations, and actually you've not done anything? And again, we need to show that we've got a report, we've looked at everything, we've got a full action plan, we've got justification where if we don't do the full extent of that recommendation. And that's what we'll be seeking to do over the next sort of 3 months.
Any more? Oh.
Just very quick observation, Christine. I support what you say about how important officer welfare is and everything. But if you just look in the same paper, I'm impressed, because wearing other hats, this percentage has been much higher. But sickness absence, if you exclude long-term sickness, is 0.84%, which is a good number. That, I think, is an indicator of that staff are reasonably happy anyway.
Although there's usually a lag. That's all.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So just one point, this all the fire regs that you're putting in place, a lot of those will be able to move to the new build anyway, won't they? If you've got so much in place, it'll be, I know it's a different building, but you know, you'll be able to take a lot of how you work it forward.
Yeah, a lot of the principles remain the same, including things like fire warden training and making sure we've got a good number of people, one per floor. A lot of those disciplines will remain the same, as will the testing and recorded disciplines, so absolutely.
Thank you. Right, if we can move on, no more comments. The recommendation, members note the contents of the report. Thank you. Item 16, annual treasury management and prudential indicators.
Should be able to do this one quickly, Chair, I think. I was disappointed to hear Christine didn't think this was her favourite report on FRAS, but earlier on. This is the one that we bring with the outturn of the position at the end of the year relating to strategy events 25-26, and I think the key bits just to pull out are the rate of return. So again, emphasising area that 364,000 of return at 4.38%, which is good, a good performance. And I think the other one I'd just pull out is normally we just say all prudential indicators none were breached, because that's normally the way for us because we don't have borrowing. The only thing I'd emphasise in here is because of a technical change in accounting leasing, we have gone over what was in the strategy. So in the strategy, we cater for long-term leases as being part of that borrowing kind of ceiling. So that's Danby Lodge, which has about 170,000 in there. You'll remember, for those of you with the accounts, when we signed the accounts off, we've changed the way that leases are accounted. Well, we haven't. The bodies that be have made us change the way we account for leases by changing the accounting standards. That's meant now that all of our leases are now catered as that. Therefore, that debt figure goes up. So that figure is higher than the 177 we had in the strategy, but it's just basically converting existing leases onto balance sheet per accounting requirements. So it's a technicality.
Thanks, Pete. Any comments? Thank you. Recommendation, members note the performance of the Treasury management operation during 25-26 and the outturn position on prudential indicators. All happy? Thank you. If we move on to private minutes.
Yeah, private business. Yeah.
Have we any other business? I haven't any other business. Thank you. We'll move into private